Robert Hicks here for Samuel Bachman. Hello, fans of Showbiz Today. This afternoon, we are in the backyard of Hollywood schlockmeister Samuel Bachman, who...
Please, call me Sam.
As I was saying, Sammy Bachman has Hollywood all abuzz because in a dazzling bit of showmanship, he managed to outbid the entire town for the rights to the national bestseller, Angels on Tap. So tell us, how did you pull off this coup? How does Sammy Bachman, formerly best known for such straight-to-video schlock as Wuthering Heights, A Ghoul of My Dreams, and One Man's Poison, win out in a bidding war that ultimately pitted you against the legendary Harvey Weinstein for the rights to this modern comedy classic?
Well, if I do say so myself, when Sammy Bachman sets his sights on something, he's a regular bagel.
A bagel?
Yeah, you know, those hunting dogs with the good nose and the floppy ears.
Do you mean a beagle?
Bagel, beagle, potatoes. Listen, all I knew, once I quit horsing around with those measly 10 grand raises and I raised old Harv a cool mill, he'd plots.
Plots?
Yeah, you know, plots. Like, fold up. The way something folds up when you raise it a cool mill.
Yeah. Like a Harvey Weinstein?
Yeah, like that.
Aren't you worried that he'll seek revenge? Rumor has it Mr. Weinstein does not like losing.
Who likes losing? Did that English guy, Lord Nielsen, did he like losing at Waterloo?
Actually, it's Lord Nelson, and he won at Waterloo. It was Napoleon who lost.
It was. Well, that's not the way we had it in the Wild Women of Waterloo. Our ending was better. If he had lost, Napoleon would have been in no mood for a full-scale orgy.
Getting back to Harvey Weinstein, aren't you worried that you've made yourself a dangerous enemy?
You kidding? Me and old Harv, we're like this. Believe me, it's just a coincidence I hired a food taster.
I think our audience would like to know what it was about this story that touched you so much that you would, if the rumors are true, caused you to sell off your entire art collection in order to buy the rights?
Those rumors are true. I had to sell off all my Monets and my dailies, and even my precious Suzannes.
I believe you mean Monet's, Dolly's, and Cezanne's.
Did you ever own one?
Oh, no.
My point exactly.
No, okay. Okay, well, out of all the books out there, why did you need to turn Angels into a movie?
Because it was so darn magical. You haven't read it, have you?
No, I'm a pretty busy guy.
Yeah, sure. You probably spend hours a day messing with that hair.
Not hours. Hair like this doesn't grow on trees.
Don't I wish? Trees I have. Now, let me tell you about the book, and maybe you'll understand why I had to buy the rights. Relax, Booby. You wanted to know why I had to sell off my art collection? I'm gonna tell you. So it starts out, this poor dumb schmuck is driving home from work. So happens, he's a reporter. Always had dreams of writing a bestseller, but like someone else I know, he never had the time. But what he really lacked was a story worth telling. Anyway, so he's driving home from work, his car begins to act up, so he pulls off the freeway, figures to call AAA. But he finds that his cell phone is deader than his car engine. So he spots a bar. He figures he'll have a brewski, call the auto club, while he waits for a tow. He steps inside. And what does he see?
I don't know. I told you I didn't read the book.
Angels.
Angels?
Real, live angels, like I told you. It's magical. Now I'm gonna tell you exactly how I see the movie in my head. Now, you might think it would be a rather startling sight. Maybe you're even thinking you wouldn't notice right off the bat, even if you weren't worried about your car and whether the auto club would arrive before the second coming, or whether there'd ever be peace in the Middle East, or whether my Red Sox would ever have the pitching to carry themselves through July for once. What you need to remember is everyone in the bar, from the bartender to the customers alike, they all had wings. And under those circumstances, it might not be as obvious as you may think. Anytime enough people are doing the same thing, whether it's the wave or watching Dancing with the Has-Beens, it just might not be as startling as you may think. So there was Prilutsky, nursing a beer and surrounded by all these wings. He was trying to play it cool, but it wasn't easy. I mean, we've all seen wings, but they've been attached to birds and airplanes and hospitals. Seeing them attached to a room full of people is another matter. You don't want to be rude and stare. One can't help but peeping. I gotta give the guy credit. If it was me, I would have run out of the joint and checked myself into a mental ward and had myself checked out by shrinks. Could you imagine being surrounded by an entire room full of angels?
Not really. I mean, what makes you think that he didn't just make it all up?
I met the writer. Prilutsky, he's not that smart.
Hi, I'm Gabriel.
Am I dead?
No. We are.
Oh, beginning to wonder why I was seeing so many angels.
Lots of people see angels, but it's usually just one at a time. You're a reporter, aren't you?
Well, how did you know that?
You'd be surprised what we know. Give me a year, and I'll tell you what happened.
1513.
Yeah. Nothing.
You don't remember 1513?
Oh, I remember it, but nothing memorable happened. It was a lot like 762. You know, every once in a while a year comes along that is so boring. The best thing you can do is lie down and take a nap.
I know what you mean. I was that way in 1997.
Yeah, that was a snooze. Ask me about 1398.
What happened in 1398?
Jan Hus was lecturing on theology at Prague University.
And that made it memorable?
You bet. Because Jan Hus was the most boring speaker in the world. 10 minutes into his talk, 500 people would fall asleep. If he rehearsed his speech at home, his dog would fall asleep. Even birds would fall out of the tree.
Gee, and I thought Jeb Bush was bad.
I should tell you, you're not the only writer to stop by.
I'm not.
A lot of guys have been here, but nothing's ever gotten published. Shelley tried it with a sonnet. Homer with a Greek tragedy. I'll tell you what I told them. It's just a bar. It's a bar like any other bar, except all the customers are angels, which means they have wings, but no pockets. So don't expect a lot of tips.
This is a story that has to be told.
But it's never gonna be published. They're gonna laugh at you, son. They're gonna say, it's unbelievable.
They published The Bridges of Madison County. Anything is possible. What's with the black wings? Is that a fashion statement?
Some of the angels think it makes them look thinner.
And that was the beginning of a story that changed his life. On the spot, he immediately began interviewing the entire flock of them. Flock being the appropriate word, by the way. You got a den of thieves, a pride of lions, and a flock of angels. Just in case you ever wake up one morning and you find yourself on jeopardy. In short order, he commandeered a corner table and let it be known that the drinks were on him. As long as the angels answered all of his questions, he wanted to know who they were, what their jobs were, and whether or not, for the most part, angeling was a good job.
How does one become an angel?
Well, back in the old days, I mean, God created them, more or less from whole cloth. But after people started begatting and all of that, the angels couldn't keep up. So God solved that one by appointing human beings.
Dead ones.
Yes, that was the one prerequisite.
So what's the procedure?
Well, first you die, and then after your papers are processed, they give you an assignment.
Well, what sort of assignments do you get?
Well, most of us are supposed to look after people, but only in certain restricted areas.
So you're all specialists.
Exactly.
Do you think your friends would agree to be interviewed?
I don't see why not, as long as you're buying. They talk to all the others.
Who were the others?
Shakespeare, Milton, Twain, Melville, Poe, Tolstoy, not to mention Hemingway and Spillane. They all stopped by.
Shakespeare.
Right here at this spot. What was that bacon? Oh, he's one of those two-plume guys.
Two plumes.
Yeah. One for wearing and one for writing.
Dwayne and Melville, I can't believe they've all been here.
That's the problem. Nobody could believe it. They all wrote stuff about us, but they couldn't get it published. I mean, you won't be able to either.
Well, don't be too sure about that.
Hey, if William Shakespeare and Mickey Spillane struck out, what chance do you think you have?
People are a lot more open today and a lot more broad-minded, accepting things they can't see.
Do you mean gullible?
I just mean there's a lot more interest in the spiritual these days, and people are ready, even eager, to believe in the unbelievable.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've seen some of those TV infomercials.
Name's Wally. Food and beverage are my line.
I didn't know that heaven was involved in such things.
Well, officially I work for the food and beverage division of the health department. That woman over there by the pool table running in place is Joyce. She's the angel of jogging. And that good-looking guy over there ogling her is Sean. He's the angel of dieting. Ours is one of the few departments that's actually expanding.
Right off the top of my head, I'm thinking Robin Williams would be terrific as a food and beverage guy. Do you remember how funny he was in Mrs. Doubtfire?
Doubtfire. And I'm afraid Mr. Williams died a while back.
No.
Yeah.
You miss Variety 1 week. You could never catch up.
Hello. What's your name?
Cyrus. You have something to do with travel?
I've got everything to do with it. And believe me, it's not easy. What with all the different time zones, half the time I don't know if I'm coming or going.
You travel by plane?
No, clouds. Used to be the best way to fly, slow, stress-free. You could really stretch out. You could read all the way. One trip I read all of Mark Twain, got halfway through Proust.
What are your duties?
Cars and buses, jet planes and helicopters, motorcycles and rollerblades. And as if all that weren't enough, cigarette boats, parachutes and bungee cords. It's all madness. The trip itself used to be part and parcel of the travel experience. People used to voyage and journey. The very words themselves suggest an experience of self-discovery. People set sail, they cast off, they even sallied forth. These days, people's idea of a trip is a ride at a carnival that combines the worst elements of speed, noise, and weightlessness. Today, travel is strictly a matter of moving from point A to point B and back to point A in as pointless a way as mechanically possible. If someone ever devises a way to transport human beings through pneumatic tubes, he'll make a fortune.
The casting possibilities are enough to make my head explode. I mean, this could be another round the world in 80 days, because basically we've got like 14 or 15 cameos. I mean, nobody could try to hold us up for 20 million when they're only going to be in the picture for 5 or 6 minutes, right? Everyone's going to want in.
Would you mind answering a few questions?
Not at all, young man.
You seem to be enjoying that magazine. What is it?
TV Guide. It's my Bible. You understand that's just a figure of speech.
You must really enjoy the articles. I've never realized they were so funny.
I don't read the articles. I read the listings. When I read the little blurbs, they remind me of the episode. Like I was just reading about this episode of Frasier, the one where Niles winds up setting fire to Frasier's favorite couch.
You've memorized every episode of Frasier?
I've memorized every episode of every show.
Wow.
Yes. I believe that television is the greatest invention of all time. That's why I'm so proud to be associated with it.
A lot of people regard it as a terrible waste of time.
Well, I think a lot of people are a terrible waste of time.
What's the best thing about being an angel?
It's a job.
Is it like being alive, though?
Oh, yeah. In some cases, it's a lot better. We never have to punch a clock.
And what's the worst?
No paid vacations. No bad-mouthing management.
Can't you complain to anyone?
Of course. It's a God-given right to gripe. Unfortunately, it's a right that God reserves for himself. And you should hear him when he gets started. Oh, you would think nothing ever worked out the way he planned.
Really? Like what?
Oh, you name it.
Sex.
Big mistake. Total accident. I mean, Satan completely blindsided him on that one. Well, the truth, I don't think God's ever gotten over it.
How did God expect people to reproduce without sex? I mean, let's face it, Horace. Without sex, Adam would have been the first man and the last man. I mean, surely God didn't expect human beings to be a mere footnote in the history of the universe.
Actually, he did.
Really?
Sure. If you ever run into him, don't bring it up. I mean, learn from my bitter experience. Don't get him started.
According to Horace, each of you has a specific area of responsibility. What's yours?
I'd rather not say.
Why not?
It's embarrassing.
Why don't I tell you something embarrassing about myself? Then it's your turn. Fair's fair. My middle name is Beagle. My mother raised them.
Well, you're right, Beagle Boy. Compared to that, my secret's pretty puny stuff. I'm responsible for the fine arts.
What's so awful about that?
Just look around you. In the blink of an eye, the world has gone from Bach and Beethoven to reggae and rap. We've gone from Rembrandt and Da Vinci to pop art and graffiti. Think how that reflects on me. How would you feel if everyone held you responsible for the fall of Western civilization?
Do you have anything to do with professional wrestlers or longshoremen?
Well, not directly, but nobody, I dare say, is immune to my influence.
Really?
Oh, yes. I'm Lydia, the angel of romance. At least romance used to be my field. Now, of course, it's faded away like an old rose, pressed between the pages of a diary. It's really so sad. Quelle tristesse. In olden days, romance meant a lover, scaling walls or slaying dragons of one sort or another, and pledging himself to his true love.
Are you talking about chivalry? Isn't that a bit old-fashioned?
And what, sir, is outdated about eternal bliss? What's uncomfortable about lovers pledging their troth to one another?
Their what?
That's another thing. People used to know what troth meant. Now their lawyers hammer out prenuptials. Once upon a time, we had soulmates and two hearts that beat as one. Now, they're significant others. Men snigger about hooters and women giggle about butts. How can romance flourish when you treat one another like so many interchangeable body parts, like Chevys or the Colonel's chicken?
Uncle Sidney?
I'm afraid not, sonny boy. My handle's Harry. I did know an Uncle Sidney once, but he was my uncle, not yours.
It's just that you look so familiar.
I think I look a bit like Ziegfeld, a bit taller, better looking with wings.
I'm thinking maybe George Clooney. He's pretty cool, isn't he?
Oh yeah, very cool. He also has very nice hair.
Again with the hair. Just listen.
What is your job, Harry?
What job don't I have? I've done it all. Best of all, I've done it my way. I invented show business. It's my life. Or at least it would be if I had a life. Before me, people knew there was something missing in their lives, but they didn't know what. They sat around for hours on end on rocks, scratching and moaning.
Well, how did you go about it?
Well, I began with the women. Every night I've got to go up to her husband and say, "You never take me out. We never do anything together." Within a week, Harry, the first entertainer, was packing them in.
Doing what?
Herbie used to throw 19 rocks in the air at the same time.
And that's how we got juggling?
No, that's how you got dodging and ducking. Juggling came along much later and involved 3 oranges.
My name is Minerva, young man, and my field of expertise, if I might call it that without appearing immodest, is athletics.
I would have never guessed.
Actually, I'm relatively new to the job. Formerly, I was in charge of what used to be known as the social graces. But there's been less and less call for my services until finally I was as redundant as an appendix.
Well, what happened?
I was hoping you would tell me. All I know is that etiquette used to be quite important, and then one day it wasn't.
My name is Alexander. Please, don't call me Alex. You wouldn't possibly know a 37-letter word for villenage, would you?
No, I don't.
I didn't expect you to.
Don't may be so bold. You seem a bit dispirited.
Certainly discouraged.
Not the crossword puzzle, is it?
Hardly. The cause for my lethargy is that, for all intents and purposes, I've been out of work for 60 years.
Well, that's a problem. What is it that you do, or did?
My job was guiding geniuses. Hence, I've been unemployed since April 18, 1955.
What happened on that date?
Einstein died.
I guess you're a happy angel.
Oh? Why's that? Do you know something I don't?
Well, I thought that although romance and the arts might have been going to the dogs, that you can't knock modern technology.
You can't. Not if you know what's good for you. It could knock back and really hurt you.
You're not a fan of progress.
Do you realize they now have a lethal gas you can't see or smell? With just 2 ounces, you could wipe Southern California off the map. Huh. I see you're smiling.
Just visualizing.
Be that as it may, Mr. Weisenheimer, my point is that one man's progress is another man's poison gas. And a very good point it is.
Where did we go wrong? How could we have been so blind?
It wasn't our fault, George.
We were darn fools.
We were no such thing. We were idealists.
Why are you being so hard on yourselves?
Don't blame us. God knows we've tried.
There, dear. I'm sure the nice gentleman realizes we do the best we can.
More's the pity.
Please excuse us. It's just that when we started out, we had such high hopes for the future. We actually believed there could be such things as perfect nurturing parents.
And don't forget those wonderful loving tots. We believed in them too.
What is it that you do?
We oversee parenting.
Anyone could see our next subject was trying to drown his sorrows, and possibly himself, at the rate he was down in shots awry. It was as if he was trying to finish off the work began decades earlier by Carrie Nation and Billy Sunday. But instead of waging war on booze by shutting down distilleries through the 18th Amendment or using an axe to break bar tops into kindling, he was on a one-man mission to deplete the entire bar stock.
What's your name?
Who told you to sit down?
You were sleeping.
Well, then wake me up next time. My name's Al. Actually, it's Aloysius J. O'Malley. But my friends call me Swifty. At least that's what they used to call me when I still had friends.
They died?
They did.
Any of them here?
Afraid not. None of my boys made it. Actually, I guess I'm lucky to have snuck through.
You were a politician.
No. I was what you call an arranger. I helped arrange it for other people to get elected.
And now?
My official duties are to oversee politics. But mainly what I do is overlook.
Overlook?
As an angel, I try to guide them, encourage them to do the right thing. Did you ever hear such flapdoodle in all your life?
We all want to have representatives in Congress and in the White House that we can respect and look up to.
The only politician that people should look up to is the one that's hanging from the gallows.
Finally, a cheerful angel.
Well, indeed I am. Do you suppose that's because I only deal indirectly with humans?
Who do you deal with?
Why, dogs, of course.
Dogs.
Of course. Why do you sound so surprised?
I never imagined that poodles would have their own angel.
Well, isn't that like a human being to think that heaven is more about them than their pets?
They're just poor, dumb creatures.
Oh, I know. That's why we always try and make allowances for people.
I was talking about the dogs.
I know.
What about Meryl Streep?
Oh, what about her?
Is she alive?
Oh, yes, she's alive.
She'd be terrific as a dog angel.
Yeah, she's always terrific.
Basically, we've been guaranteed at least one Oscar nomination. I mean, the lady sneezes and she gets nominated.
That is so true.
What do you do for relaxation?
Mainly to unwind, I go rainbow sliding.
What's that like?
They're like those water slides at the theme parks, except we don't have to buy tickets or stand in line all day.
I didn't even realize they had TV in heaven.
It wouldn't be heaven without it. The only problem is some angels don't feel that way, so I often have to mute it.
That must make it hard on you.
Fortunately, I can read lips. Besides, they're mostly reruns, so I've seen them before.
How many times have you seen the Frasier episode that you were just reading about?
Roughly 400 times, but it just keeps getting better and better. I guess it's because I'm getting to know the characters so well. I think I love Roz best of all.
What forms of entertainment are most popular in heaven?
The usual things, celestial choirs, harp concerts, lots of reruns of I Love Lucy.
What do you think of the television medium?
Well, to quote the great archangel Fred Allen, they call it a medium because it's never done well.
What form of entertainment do you enjoy the most?
Well, in my book, you can't beat vaudeville. I mean, dog acts, ventriloquists, tumblers, Irish comics, German comics, sister acts, barbershop quartets, the whole razzmatazz. Before that, all you had was wandering minstrels and court jesters. Give me a dog that dances on its hind legs anytime.
Dogs are swell, but how much real satisfaction can there be in overseeing the affairs of creatures who pee on trees and go bout?
And who are fearless, loving, gentle, and loyal, and who don't start wars, lie, cheat, or betray their friends, whose simple goodness and piety is an example for the saints. And yet here you sit, truly astonished by the fact that we all have a special place in our hearts for them. Now, see, I find that totally astonishing. And it may further shock you to know that their place in heaven is secure, while the human race is skating on thin ice.
I never imagined.
Well, that's because it's not their way to brag. Here on Earth, even, when a dog wins a race or a blue ribbon, he doesn't hog the limelight. He's very willing to share the glory with his people.
So it's basically been your responsibility to wean us off of bark and onto burgers.
It's not as easy as it sounds. You people talk about developing a taste for olives and bran flakes, but can you imagine how long it took me to convince the very first person to try a lobster? Plus, keep in mind that butter hadn't been invented yet.
I bet it was even harder to get us onto snails.
I got lucky on that one. Butter or no butter, at the rate those little rascals reproduce, if some French gardener hadn't had a brainstorm and decided to call them escargots, you'd be buried in them by now. How'd you like to coax someone into trying yogurt before the stuff even had a name?
How'd you manage?
I found this lost soul wandering in the Gobi Desert for 2 weeks, dining on sand in his sneakers. Even at that, it took another 5 days before he caved in.
And are you telling me that there's no other geniuses?
Nothing much to speak of.
Find that hard to believe.
Of course you do. That's because human beings throw the word around as recklessly as rice at a wedding. By actual count, in the history of the world, there have been 9 geniuses. But if you believe, say, in People magazine, they're as plentiful as fleas on a bloodhound. Everyone who ever directed a movie that turned a profit, or been a lawyer for a celebrity criminal, or made a financial killing on Wall Street, or made the cover of People, for that matter, qualifies for their pantheon.
As it is, the last person who actually sought creative inspiration was Andy Warhol. And I'm afraid he misunderstood when I told him that to be a great artist, he might have to eat Campbell's soup to survive.
If it has you so upset, why don't you do something about it?
I am a muse. And clearly, you are unaware of a muse's role.
What happened? Get all mused out?
It's you people. You stopped wanting to be divinely inspired. Writers stopped writing great novels and started writing bad TV shows. Composers lost interest in symphonies and concentrated on jingles selling soap and potato chips. Architects stopped designing cathedrals like Notre Dame and started designing towers like Notre Trump. There used to be hundreds of us in the arts department. It was thrilling. More than a mere job, it was a calling. Every time you turned around, voila, another masterpiece.
What happened?
What always happens. Funding for the arts dries up. The usual cutbacks take place, and here I am, Helen, the lone surviving muse.
Every time I read that chapter, I break up. Everything she says is so darn true.
Don't you realize she's talking about people like you? You know, people who produce movies like Wuthering Heights and The Wild Women of Waterloo.
Of course I realize that. That's why I had to make the ultimate sacrifice and sell my Monets and my Suzannes and my dailies. That's why I have to have my name on Angels on Tap. Don't you understand? I'm trying to save my soul.
You miss the old days?
Sure do. If only we could turn the clock back. There were relaxing carriage rides, train trips, long sea voyages, and on an occasion an exhilarating gallop across the meadow. Once in a great while, for a refreshing change of scenery, a scent in a hot air balloon. Today you get hit with so many rush jobs, we're all on shooting stars.
I'll never forget the day the wheel was invented. There was such excitement.
Did they have any idea what to do with it?
None whatsoever. That's what made it so exciting. Everyone sensed they were onto something big, but they had no idea what.
Was it one person who made the discovery?
Of course. It's always one person. As soon as you get a second person in the room, all he'll do is tell the first person to stop horsing around and get a real job.
So who was it that discovered the wheel?
It was a guy named Benny. He was just fooling around one day with different shapes. It's very fortunate he finally came up with round.
What do you mean?
Well, for the longest time, he got hung up on triangles. Can you imagine driving around on 4 steel-rimmed triangles?
I guess you could say that we were just a bunch of general practitioners. Back then, there wasn't a lot of trouble that people could get into. So, just as long as they didn't mix it up with witches and they remembered to say their prayers 30 or 40 times a day, the job was a snap.
What did it consist of?
Mostly hovering.
Hovering?
Yeah. You've seen it in all the paintings. Like that. I mean, we hovered a lot. Whenever anybody important was born, there we were, hovering overhead. Likewise, when they died. I mean, we'd show up at weddings and crucifixions and most of your bigger shindigs.
Can you tell me about some of the great painters you have known?
Well, I hate to drop names, but perhaps you've heard of Michelangelo?
I imagine he's one of the greatest of them all.
Certainly the laziest.
How can you say that? A lazy man painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel?
He only took the job because he could do it lying down.
Still, it was a tremendous achievement. Didn't it take him 4 or 5 years?
Of course. That's because he kept napping. Anyone else would have had it finished in 2 weeks tops. Frankly, in all honesty, I have to admit I outdid myself that time.
How so?
Maybe you think it's easy being museful, when every time you come around, the artist is 200 feet up in the air, snoring like a bear.
I am amazed that you have to oversee all the fine arts. I would think that painters alone would keep you hopping.
Hopping mad. Somewhere along the line, the art of painting turned into the art of framing. People put frames around dots and drips and smudges, and the stuff sells for millions. Without the fancy frames, they're the sort of things that parents of very young children attach to their refrigerators with little magnets.
You know, our biggest mistake was letting parents keep the children around even after the children were bigger than they are. It breaks down the natural order of things when a parent gives a command and the child is like, oh yeah, or who's gonna make me? Or worst of all, you and who else?
Sounds like you're talking about teenagers.
Oh, the awful T word. We try not to say it.
It's a modern aberration, you know. Both the word and the thing itself, they're an offense to Mother Nature. Kind of like a butterfly turning back into larva.
But haven't we always had teenagers?
Of course not.
But how could it be avoided?
In those happier days, there was simply no such thing as a teenager.
You went straight from being an adorable little 6-year-old to a very short coal miner. I always say there's nothing like a 16-hour workday to keep the young tykes out of mischief, if you know what I mean.
What are your duties?
Well, let's just say that if it weren't for old Wally, people would still be noshing on twigs, grass, and small rodents.
When you put it that way, I guess I owe you a pretty large debt.
I'd say so. Though actually field mice were considered delicacies until just recently. Heck, fella, it wasn't that long ago that you folks gobbled up acorns like they were beer nuts.
Well, what has changed?
It was decided that there weren't enough differences to distinguish human beings from owls, bears, and wild boars, and that perhaps diet might be an area worth exploring.
Who was the greatest genius?
Well, that's easy. It was Og.
Never heard of him.
Of course you didn't. For one thing, he never made the cover of People. And for another, he was quite a while before your time. Several million years before.
What made him such a genius?
He invented the alphabet.
That's quite an accomplishment.
It was even better before he caved into outside pressure.
Well, what happened?
He had a wife who thought she was creative. Q, X, and Z were her ideas.
So Og compromised.
Well, it was either that or sleep outside with the Tyrannosaurus. Genius is a demanding mistress, but it's nothing compared to a pushy wife.
I had a wife like Og's.
In what way?
Pushy. Mrs. Bachman, #1. And that divorce cost me almost as much as this book, but it was money well spent.
How so?
Taught me that marrying someone just because they look good on your arm is a lousy reason to get married. Much better to go out and buy something that looks good on your wall.
Like it says Annie.
Yeah.
When did things start to go downhill for you?
After Edison, I'd have to say it stopped being fun.
You admired Edison.
He flabbergasted me. He had a brain on him the size of a bowling ball. They say the legs are the first to go, but if you got a brain like Edison's, it's the neck.
I take it that you've been on a first-name basis with some of the biggest brains in history. Is there any one moment that stands out for you?
No.
Come on, there must be something. I mean, the supper where Socrates expounded on the meaning of love, the day Shakespeare drafted Hamlet's soliloquy, Isaac Newton's discovery of gravity.
What, you think Newton was one of the 9?
Well, I assumed.
The man was just lucky he fell asleep under an apple tree. If it had been a palm tree, a coconut could have fallen on his head. And let me tell you, fella gets beamed by one of those babies, his big concern isn't with the laws of nature, it's his health insurance.
Still, he discovered gravity.
He didn't discover it. All he did was name it. What, you think he was the first person who ever noticed things didn't fall up?
One idea that really knocked me for a loop was the car. I still can't get over it.
You mean the internal combustion engine?
Oh, good gracious, no. That's just noisy and messy. I mean, what made the fellow plunge ahead? How could he possibly imagine that others were going to invent paved roads, signals, street lights, speed bumps, gas stations, tow trucks, and those big fuzzy dice just to accommodate his nutsy notion? What an ego. With an ego that enormous, you half expect to see a bunch of guys named Lars climbing up and planting a flag on it.
I imagine that you've met all the greatest artists that ever lived.
I knew them all, except for Roca.
Who was Roca?
He was the first one to do cave drawings. By the time I realized it was art and not vandalism, it was too late to meet him.
Why? What happened?
A dinosaur ate him for breakfast. And so art criticism was born.
Who was the first professional comedian?
The first professional comedian was Henry Youngfellow, but his career didn't last long. Every other line out of his mouth was, "Prithee, taketh thee my wife."
I always thought that court jesters lived by their wits.
In a sense, they did. Their job, you see, was to fall down laughing every time the king made a joke. The louder they laughed, the longer they lived. That's why people started thinking that laughing was good for your health.
Weren't any of the jesters funny?
Well, some laughed funnier than the others. But even the jester known as Haggis the Hilarious never had a better line than, "She's no lady, she's Lord Ashford's wife."
Who do you regard as the greatest romantics?
One who readily comes to mind is Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal as a mausoleum when his wife, the lovely Mumtaz Mahal, passed away.
Well, the Taj Mahal was a heck of a gesture.
But nothing compared to the Taj Shirley.
The Taj Shirley. Never heard of that one.
It was the house that Shah Jahan had to build for his second wife when she got a gander at the tomb he'd built for number one. As Shirley put it, and rightly so if you want my opinion, that woman's living better than me, and she's dead.
The place must have been spectacular.
Oh my, yes. Not only was it twice as big as the Taj Mahal, but the reflecting pool was indoors. Say what you will about Shirley. She definitely knew what she wanted.
Which invention impressed you the most?
Where to start? There's so many you couldn't count. The safety pin was a real doozy. Very simple, but a real moneymaker. And baseball cleats were another. Without the cleats, nobody would have ever gotten to first base. Halfway there, they'd fall down. It's a very slippery game, baseball. Without the cleats, it would have been ice skating. The escalator is a snappy idea. And the juicer's a pip. Nothing I enjoy more in the morning than a nice, fresh glass of orange juice. You like orange juice?
Sure.
Everybody does. But do you ever go to a park and see a statue of the smart guy who made it all possible? And what about the fellow who invented popcorn?
I never thought of popcorn as an invention.
It doesn't exactly grow on trees, but technically speaking, you're right. Popcorn's always been around, but it wasn't always food. It was packing material. In fact, it was a guy with a warehouse full of the stuff who made it all possible. One night, he sat up in bed and shouted, "Butter and salt!" Scared his wife half to death, but he made millions. And that's where you got the saying, one man's packing material is another man's snack.
I think you may need this more than I do. I don't want you to have that. Now, listen. What made the old days bearable were the bosses.
But weren't they all corrupt? I mean, surely you don't long for the return of Tammany Hall.
These days, the people have to bribe the politicians to get anything done. In the old days, the politicians would bribe the people. $2 per vote if you voted for the right party. On election day, a go-getter could really score. He could get himself $10. $10! That'd feed a family of 4 for a week.
Surely you don't think life was better back in those dark ages, do you?
It was, if you were a parent. You're too young to remember, I suppose, but there was a time when youngsters were grateful to find an apple in their Christmas stocking.
I should say so. They were grateful for the stocking. It's the thought that counted.
When do you think things started falling apart?
When parents started giving their kids spending money.
And the car keys.
Cable.
Store-bought clothes.
Their own phones. Their own beds.
Their own opinions.
Their own bathrooms. And one thing led to another.
Their own bathrooms?
Yeah, that's right, mister. They began feeling entitled to the modern luxuries of life, and they hadn't done anything to earn them. They didn't milk the cows or till the South 40. They didn't even take out the trash or bring in the newspaper.
Or say thank you for all that matter. And still, their parents went on treating them like little Dalai Lamas.
But at least teenagers now have a sense of their own worth.
An overinflated sense, you mean?
Why do you think people persist in having children?
The perpetuation of the human race?
For their pelts?
For their pelts.
What do you consider the biggest problem with air travel?
Leg room. People keep getting taller and seats keep getting smaller.
Do you see a solution?
Oh, sure, but it'll first mean soaking passengers in olive oil.
What's the best thing about being an angel?
You get to sneak in all the movies for free.
What's the worst?
The movies.
Well, who would have known that the movies would catch on the way they did? I mean, I just thought it was a novelty, a fad, like the yo-yo. I thought when Mary Pickford hung up her curls, they would all blow over. Seems like just yesterday you paid a nickel and saw 8 acts that would knock your socks off, not to mention chorus girls with meat on their bones. Now, you pay $10 to watch Jim Carrey make faces for 2 hours.
Then why is it if travel is so much bother, people still insist on taking trips?
I myself blame it on the movies.
I don't see the connection.
In the movies, they don't show you any of the bad or boring parts of travel. People in the movies never spend 6 hours going through customs and they never strip search because they look a tiny bit like a fugitive terrorist. In the movies, people never get sick from the water. Their hotel rooms are always ready and waiting and the telephone always works. In the movies, people spend all their time falling in love, not trying to track down their lost luggage. The clincher, though, is that in the movies, people can spend their entire holidays in Rome eating pasta and drinking wine and never gain an ounce. And when you get right down to it, the worst thing that ever happened to tourists in the movies was that they got seduced by Rosanna Brazzi.
Now that you mention it, he did pop up in an awful lot of those movies.
The man did more for the travel industry than honey roasted peanuts and Dramamine combined.
Do you have a favorite show?
Wouldn't that be like asking a mother if she has a favorite child? Each in its own way is special, but just between us, I must confess I have a special soft spot for quiz shows.
Really? Why do you think that is?
I believe it must be because they're so educational.
Some people actually believe TV destroys brain cells.
I wouldn't want to sound judgmental, but those people don't have two brain cells to rub together if you ask me.
I must say, for someone in the love game, you don't seem to have your heart in it. Don't you believe in your own product?
Of course I do, but you people are hopeless. Lust has long replaced love as the governing emotion, and romance has given way to pornography. Why wouldn't I be a pessimist? I truly believe the world sought what I had to offer. Now the scales fell from my eyes, and I see the tunnel at the end of the light.
Is there nothing that can be done?
Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I managed to get by, renting Casablanca, and now Voyager every few months, and a little white wine never hurts.
Tell me, who thought up applause?
No one thought it up. It was an accident, really. You see, in the beginning, when people liked a performer, they stayed quiet. The more they liked it, the quieter they were. Then, one night, some musician was making music with rocks, and the mosquitoes were driving everyone nuts. People were slapping themselves so hard, it made such a racket you couldn't hear the music. But the musician kept on playing. So in one fell swoop, you got rock and roll, applause, and encores.
Is there any one person whose contribution seems to be greater than all the rest?
Absolutely.
Henry Ford, the Wright brothers?
H.G. Wells.
Why H.G. Wells? What did he do for travel?
He dreamed up the time machine. The person sat at home in a chair and time did all the traveling. You wanted to go somewhere, you flipped a dial and it came to you. Next best was Gutenberg.
The Gutenberg who invented the printing press?
There was another Gutenberg.
But what's the printing press got to do with travel?
After Gutenberg, if people suddenly decided they wanted to go visit Timbuktu, they could read about it first. After 20 pages, they got bored, they could put the book down and they were home. No packing, no catching the next plane out, no worrying about the city flies.
Some people say travel is broadening.
Sure, and some people are cannibals, there's no accounting for taste. As someone once pointed out, if travel were all that broadening, stewardesses and Buzz Aldrin would be the smartest people on Earth.
I probably shouldn't tell tales out of school, but the possibility of pulling the plug on the human race has been discussed more than once.
No.
Yes, yes. The ones that were in favor of it thought that it would be more merciful in the long run because of the damage they're doing to the planet and the other inhabitants. But it never came up to a final vote because the dogs went to bat for you. I don't know why. Heaven knows they have a soft spot in their hearts for people. It may sound like so much bow wow to you, sir, but it was only their eloquence that saved your bacon.
Gee.
Gee, indeed. The only thing they haven't been able to figure out is why, if they're your best friends, the way you always claim they are, why so many of you insist on palling around with cats?
Don't look at me. I'm allergic. Miss Mary?
Yes.
You wouldn't happen to know a little schnauzer named Whiskers, would you?
Yes, I do. It took me weeks to heaven break that little Dickens, but he was worth it. He's a love.
Would you tell him that I said hello?
My pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Remember when the reporter was talking about his dog? Yeah, that could have been me.
You had a schnauzer named Whiskers?
Not exactly.
You had a dog named Whiskers?
Not exactly.
Did you even have a dog?
Not exactly. My dad didn't like dogs. I had an invisible friend named Leonard. But I couldn't have loved him any more if he had 4 feet and a tail.
What happened to him?
One day he chased a ball into the street and he got hit by a car. I still miss him. He'd be 52 years old today if he didn't stop to scratch himself.
Who came up with the idea of eating 3 meals a day?
The English. In the 14th century, there were 2 princes, Harold the Fat and Bertram the Bulimic. Harold felt that 5 meals a day was just about right, while his brother Bertram argued that 1 was quite sufficient, especially if you didn't swallow. Before a war broke out between the 2 factions, their father, Arnold the Moderate, worked out a compromise. It was Arnold who gave meals their names. Breakfast was so called because it broke a fast, and dinner was named after the bell they rang when it was time to eat.
And lunch?
Named after the Duke of Lunch, the man who said, just because it's too late for breakfast and too early for dinner doesn't mean we've got to starve.
I suppose people simply decided that it simply didn't matter which fork they used.
The tricky part was getting people to use forks in the first place for something besides scratching their back.
But why were the rules of etiquette so elaborate?
So that people could relax, knowing exactly how to behave in every social situation.
Is there nobody these days that you think even has a spark of genius?
The pickings are awfully slim, but I suppose if I had to come up with one name, it would be Oprah.
Oprah Winfrey is a genius?
Let me put it to you, that turning lead into gold used to be considered a big deal. This woman managed to turn drivel into $2 billion. I think even Og would have been impressed.
Who else comes to mind when you think of the great romantics?
Norman Cooperman ranks right there up at the top.
What did he do?
It's what he didn't do. During World War II, PFC Cooperman got to see Marlene Dietrich at the Hollywood Canteen. She kissed him on the cheek, and he never again washed his face. Now that's what I call romantic.
It's not very hygienic.
Well, that's true. But should I remind you, romance isn't for sissies. Look at Van Gogh. For love, he gave up an ear. And Edward, you may recall, even gave up the throne of England. If it doesn't come at enormous sacrifice, it's not romance, dear boy. It's just dating.
Obviously, you've seen them all. But who would you say is the greatest entertainer who ever lived?
You know, it's hard to put a finger on one person. I mean, did Will Rogers play the musical saw? Did Fanny Bryce juggle? If Gallagher and Sheen tap danced, I missed it. Did Gypsy Rose Lee do impressions? Who cares? Now, if you wanted the loudest voice, that would be Caruso. The guy had lungs like watermelons. Funny thing about Caruso, though, he could never whistle. When he tried to whistle, it sounded like he had crackers in his mouth. That's why the guy never owned a dog. You can look it up. Now, if it was whistling you wanted, then you had the choice between Wiedemeyer's Birds and Al Jolson. Even that was a toss-up. I mean, Jolson had more range, but the Birds were housebroken.
In your opinion, who was the greatest of them all? Was it Garbo, Tracy, Gable, or Hepburn?
You know, in my opinion, the best of the bunch, the one who impressed me the most, was Esther Williams.
Esther Williams.
Who else? That broad was a big star, never got out of the pool. You think that was easy? You try doing a performance in 8 feet of water. The chlorine alone could kill you.
And that made her greater than, say, Sir Laurence Olivier?
There was no comparison. He acted in the West End, you noticed, but never in the deep end.
How was it decided that you, of all angels, would have been assigned to sports?
Well, I don't know for certain, but I would venture that they looked around for something else that had lots of rules governing conduct. Rules, after all, are my meat.
Do you oversee all areas of sports, including basketball and football?
Oh, so you can still distinguish between the two. You really must be paying close attention. But to answer your question, though, basically all physical activity, aside from sex and channel surfing, falls within my domain.
I'm not questioning your qualifications. Well, actually, I guess I am questioning your qualifications. So you just don't strike me as a jock.
I suppose that's why I got the job. They were looking for a civilizing influence.
What has been your greatest single challenge?
Actually, there are two. The first was artichokes. It took me over 1,000 years to figure out how to eat them. But the real toughie was alcohol. The stuff tasted awful, it smelled worse, and it played tiddlywinks with the old kidneys.
All that being the case, why'd you bother?
It's because it made us laugh when you folks would get drunk and start arguing politics and religion.
Even if I grant that running for political office can be pricey enterprise, surely that's money donated with no strings attached?
The lobbyist doesn't just walk around with a bag full of money. They advise where to invest his money. And that senator gets to vote on getting it done.
What about the ones who already have money?
Nobody ever seems to have enough money. You don't see Bill Gates picking up his pension check, do you?
You make it sound so tawdry.
The fact remains that no matter how poor a guy is when he first gets elected, by the time he retires, he's wealthy. And all because he knows how to vote on the job.
Sounds to me like the real problem is the lobbyist.
He's just providing a public service. The question is, why should anyone give a contribution to a candidate unless he expects to get it back 1,000-fold?
And yet some people do. I've contributed to a few political campaigns. I mean, I wasn't expecting any favors. I just felt the candidate was best represented my concerns.
There's a word for people like you.
Responsible citizen.
Sucker.
Would you agree that nothing beats organized sports for turning young boys into real men?
I'm just a little old lady, Angel. So what do I know of such matters? Still, it always struck me as a wee bit odd that organized athletics called for 30 to 40 robust young men to shower together, when everyone knows that's the main reason 10% of them join the team in the first place.
Looking back over your career, who are some of the other artists that stand out?
Picasso was almost as cute as he thought he was. Dali, crazy as a poodle. Rembrandt never took a bath. Whistler was a mama's boy. And the biggest pain in the neck was that Botticelli.
Why was that?
He's the one who insisted on painting us angels in those sappy robes and the big halos, the flowing ribbons, and all the rest of that silly falderall.
But you're not dressed that way now.
That's because we're not working. When we're on the job, we have to be in full regalia. It's how people expect to see us, all because of his goofy paintings. The man wasn't an artist. He was a costume designer with a paintbrush. If we showed up not looking the way he painted us, people assumed we were just ghosts or the end result of too many dry martinis. But if we appeared looking like something whipped up by a French pastry chef, people took us seriously.
Did Botticelli become an angel when he died?
Why do you ask?
I just thought it would be very ironic if he himself wound up having to spend all of eternity looking like a piece of wedding cake.
Yes, I suppose that would have been ironic, but old Botticelli didn't exactly get his wings. What he got were his just desserts.
What happened to him?
He's bussing tables at the Cafe Limbo.
Bet he wishes he stuck to landscapes.
Too late now. What old Botticelli didn't get, I'm afraid, is that angels don't get irony. We get even.
I was wondering, whatever happened to Christopher, the one who used to be the patron saint of travelers?
Ever since a demotion, he was plenty bitter. Only time he'd even leave the house was in the middle of the night when he'd run out to airports and mix up people's luggage.
So he's the one.
Yes, but he's okay now. Ever since he and the missus got cable, he seems satisfied to stay at home and watch old travel logs.
You know, in the old days, after all, things were pretty brutal. With the Mayans, the losing athletes were sacrificed to appease the, you should excuse the expression, gods. These days, if worse comes to worse, they get traded to Milwaukee.
There are those who feel that winning is everything. Are you one of those people?
Hardly. I am firmly of the opinion that it doesn't matter if you win or lose, it's how you play the game. Unless, of course, you're an ancient Mayan.
Who are some of the great chefs you've known?
At the top of the list, Charles of the Ritz, famous for his toasted cheese sandwich.
He invented it?
Nobody did perfect it. He was the guy who first burnt the cheese around the edge a little. The man was genius.
There are people who claim it is immoral for us to eat meat. Do you agree?
That's really not my area. The way I look at it, if it tastes good, eat it.
You're saying morality doesn't enter into it.
Keep in mind that what appears to be a question of morality is very often only a matter of geography. Cows are held to be sacred in some places, and some dogs are considered snacks. Or take bugs. In one country, they're pests, in another, they're protein. But when you start talking morality, you get into a big gray area. For instance, there are definitely those, and I count myself among them, who saw it as a giant step up the evolutionary ladder when people started eating mutton and gave up dating it.
I don't know if this comes under the category of air travel, but I am curious about one thing.
Don't ask. I still don't understand how frequent flyer miles work.
No, it's those people who you read about all the time that get hit by trains. They can't all be committing suicide.
I have a news flash for you. None of them is committing suicide.
Then how do they get themselves killed? I mean, a train doesn't sneak up on you. A train, for God's sakes, is bigger than a herd of elephants, louder than a teenager's boombox, and it can't jump off the tracks and chase you down. So how does it happen that trains kill more people than disgruntled postal employees and botulism put together?
Does the number 49 have any significance for you?
Bill O'Reilly's hat size?
Close, but no cigar. No. That's the average IQ of people who get run over by choo-choos. In the Wild Kingdom, it's referred to as thinning the herd.
Do you have a favorite sport?
Professional wrestling. Nobody gets hurt.
Which sport was the worst?
Christians versus the Lions. Even the bookies didn't care much for that one.
What's the strangest sport you've ever seen?
Without a doubt, that would have to be early water polo.
Really, why is that?
It took them a while to figure out it just wouldn't work with horses.
Finally, Miss Minerva, if you weren't in charge of sports, what job would you like to have?
Well, lately I've been thinking of giving real estate a whirl.
What would you do in real estate?
First, I'd send Donald Trump to Milwaukee.
Do you have hope for the future?
Of course I do. Why wouldn't I?
Sometimes I worry that technology is moving too fast for us, and that I worry that it will do away with us.
No matter how big the machinery, or how intelligent, or how powerful, that will never happen. At least, not so long as we remember one thing.
And that is that we were created in God's image, and that there's a spark of immortality in each and every one of us.
No. The one thing we mustn't ever forget is to always include an off switch.
When the next pair of angels stood before him, he looked around and he realized they were the last angels left. He tried to figure out what their roles were, but what was left? The angels of medical malpractice? The angels of insurance adjusters? The angels of small household appliances? In the end, he was to learn that not only the Cocker Spaniels and Chihuahuas have a higher standing in heaven than we humans, but so do toaster ovens and electric blankets.
How have things changed over the years?
Well, we've certainly had to adapt.
To go along with the flow, as it were. Along the way, we found the need to expand to include philosophy, mythology, dietary law.
And don't forget military strategy and medieval tortures.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly been a broadening experience.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you would have guessed. But it was getting late, and he had quite an evening. That's why he was rather taken back when Julian Judd told him that their arena was religion. Yeah, sure you would have guessed. Yeah, right, have it your way. And I'm sure you also would have guessed that Mary was the dog angel.
Well, in the old days, there were very few religions. Nothing fancy, you know.
Truth is, if all of the services had been conducted in Latin and you were to close your eyes, you'd never know where you were.
Yeah. But you know how people are.
Complicated.
Well, let's just say not too bright. So before you could say Moses in the bulrushes, there were more religions, cults, sects, and covens than you could shake a stick at.
Tempted as you might be.
Yeah. They just sprang up like toadstools. Seems like every time you turned around, there was people speaking in tongues and channeling and reading backwards, twirling around in circles, playing with snakes.
What's religion like in heaven? I mean, do you go to church? Does God give sermons?
No,
No, why not?
we don't need it. The main point of religion is to remind people that God exists. We don't need reminding God exists.
And if you need reminding, try turning your stereo on sometime after midnight.
If you could tell people one thing, what would it be?
I think people should remember that although God answers all prayers, sometimes they have to accept that the answer's no.
The only thing wrong with people is they keep on asking questions long after they've been provided with all the answers they'll ever need.
You mean the Ten Commandments?
Yeah. The trouble with most people, if you ask me, is that they seem to think that there are 6 commandments and 4 suggestions.
Judd, Julie, there's one thing that I have to ask you.
Of course.
You wouldn't be human if you didn't ask.
God, what's he like?
The waitress.
God looks like the waitress?
God is the waitress.
God is waitress. Hey guys, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck.
Suit yourself, but that's the truth.
If you don't believe us, just ask her.
She's God, and I'm a monkey's uncle.
Close enough.
Come on, honey, let's call it a night.
Now we get to my favorite part. Prilutsky dawdled. I love that word. Couldn't you see him dawdling? He's worried that Judd and Judy are playing a joke on him, and he doesn't want to embarrass himself by asking an old woman if she's God. But how could he resist? I mean, as Prilutsky writes, what could it hurt on a night where I've already met a room full of angels to ask an elderly waitress if she's God? I've yet to meet a waiter in a Jewish deli who wasn't half convinced he was God. So what did he have to lose?
I don't mean to be rude, but those two told me that you were God.
So, what's the question?
My question is, are you her?
By her, do you mean me?
Well, I do, if you're her.
Well, if I'm not, then who is?
So you really are her.
So help me.
You're telling me that God is waiting tables in a crummy bar?
I've seen worse. In fact, right at this moment, I am sweeping up a cafe in downtown Beirut. Makes this place look like Versailles.
That's not the point. God waiting tables in a bar? That's outrageous.
You're right, I suppose. And to tell you the truth, a little hard on my feet, but I soak 'em good when I get home. But it's honest work. We got a nice clientele, and I get Sundays off.
What was that all about?
Oh, you noticed I left.
Or wasn't I supposed to? That was a darn good trick.
I must be slowing down. Used to be I could be everywhere all at the same time.
Where were you just now?
A giant comet just crashed into Siberia. Comets, volcanoes, tidal waves. I just love all that stuff.
What are you doing here?
Mostly staying in touch with my workforce.
Like a CEO who's lunching at the company cafeteria?
That's the idea. It shows that you're just one of the gang. It's supposed to boost morale. I read all about that in a book about modern management techniques. Oh, and I've just joined a bowling league. Ooh, I can't tell you how hard it is for me not to throw strikes.
Speaking of books, how would you suggest I go about getting published? I heard about all those hotshot writers that tried and failed. And if, they couldn't get published, how can I?
Frankly, I wouldn't mind a little positive publicity. Lately, the only time I see my name in print is when Time periodicals announces my demise. Or some crazy cult leader says that he has me on hold.
What do you think I should do?
Well, when you write your book, you give me a holler. I'll make a few calls.
You know people in the book business?
I wrote a bestseller,
I forgot.
So did they. I'm still waiting for my first royalty check. Oh, by the way, your car's ready now.
I have to admit, that is quite the tale.
Now do you understand why this book is so important to me?
I guess I do.
Look, I know I'm a joke. I've owned paintings, and I didn't even know how to say the names of the artists. But that doesn't mean I didn't appreciate their beauty. Believe me, wallpaper would have been a whole lot cheaper. But I love beautiful things. And I want Angels to be a beautiful movie.
Good luck.
Sometimes. I know this is gonna sound nuts, but sometimes I feel like my mom was standing as close to me as you are. And she's been gone for nearly 20 years. She's the real reason I bought this book. So I could dedicate the movie to her. She is the real reason that I know that angels really exist.
She'd like that.
Well, it was nice meeting you.
Same here.
Peace.
From your mouth to my ear.